And then this is how I want you to act when I say this word. This is how I want you to respond when I say this word. Do you agree? And it goes both ways.
Lisa Bilyeu, welcome to my channel.
Brother of mine, thank you for having me.
Okay, so I want to start by talking to you about confidence. Now, just happen to have your book here, Radical Confidence. I recommend that everyone goes out and buys this. Personally, signed copy, of course. But I want to specifically talk about confidence after heartbreak. So I think that confidence is like a superpower. I like to say that it's the only reliable thing that can make you anti-fragile to heartbreak. And by that, I mean that it's not like you can't be hurt. You can. It's just that you have the emotional resilience to kind of come back from it even better than you were before. So talk to me, if you can, about confidence and specifically about how someone can grow their confidence after dealing with heartbreak.
Yeah, such a great question, because I think this is the one thing that I notice that so many people struggle with, because the relationship part of it, you pour yourself into it. It isn't just like when a business, obviously you have emotion attached to it, but when it becomes a relationship, you put trust, you have a future. In fact, I just interviewed someone that said you have an entire future that you've built in your head about what that's going to look like. So you think about kids, you think about buying a house, you think about when you die, you know, like they're going to be by your bedside. And so when you have heartbreak, you have to mourn the future you thought you were going to have with them. And so that becomes something that really can not just knock your confidence, but knock your identity, knock the belief that you had of what your future was going to look like. And so I think it's very important, number one, to give yourself the time to go, okay, I just have to sit here right now in the feeling. Like, I think a lot of us also want to just jump to the next thing. It's like, okay, how do I either date again, or they flip and say, I'm never going to date again. But I think the key is to actually just take the moment to feel the feeling, grieve the person or the relationship you thought you were going to have with them, and then start to rebuild your confidence step by step. So you have to then say, what does that look like? I don't think getting into the relationship to build your confidence is the answer, because then you're now becoming susceptible to that person treating you either good or bad, and that's going to reflect on whether you're confident or not. So usually therapists recommend you spend at least a year single after a heartbreak. Now, why a year? Because it's going to take time for you to build your self-esteem back up. It's going to take time for you to build your confidence. And as you do that, one by one, who am I? How did I let myself go? How did I lose who I was? How did I misread the signs? How did I trust somebody that then abused my trust? Like, you have to give yourself space to ask yourself all these questions in order to build yourself back up to be resilient. It isn't that you just wake up the next day and you are resilient. And just like a scar is a wound that has healed, but now is thicker over time, right? It becomes thick so that that wound can never be as susceptible to damage. And so that is really what happens to the heart. And you don't want to either go one way or another. You don't want to get to, I'm never going to love again because this heartbreak is too hard. Or you don't want to swing the other way, like I said, and then just go into another relationship and trust them immediately. So I think grieving the future that you thought you were going to have with that person, identifying where you maybe had trusted somebody that hadn't earned the trust yet, taking on that potential responsibility and say, what am I going to do next time so that someone now has to earn my trust versus I'm just going to give my trust away. And then really working on your self-esteem and your confidence by doing things that make you feel good about yourself. So for me, it's working out. Working out for me is me in the gym. Every day that I go there, it's me against the weights. That builds my self-confidence. It's about the little wins that I can have, whether I showed up today with my brother or with my sister, or, the things that allow you to say, I said I was going to be the person that was going to show up for this interview, and I showed up. That builds my confidence because it builds trust back in me. And so there's all these little things that you can do. That's just kind of like the foundation to how I think you can build your confidence after a heartbreak.
Wow, that's so powerful. Mourning I never thought about it that way. Mourning your future relationship and all the things that you'd kind of come to just expect that would happen. But I think you're right. I think you have to, I hear it all the time, you have to kind of kill the hope. And, because people after a breakup, they're always thinking, oh, maybe I can get back together. But I think it's just a really unhealthy pattern that you can get into in your brain. You have to, like you say, you have to kill it and mourn it and maybe go to the funeral. I don't know. But that's really interesting. And I think a lot of people early in dating as well can kind of get carried away with all these expectations about what the future may hold. And, even you just like maybe just matched with someone on a dating site and you based on a couple of grainy photos and a funny joke, and you're starting to think about all your future holidays together and what your kids might look like and all these things. So people do kind of, you do kind of overinvest sometimes. And I think it's important to recognize when you just need to kind of cut that off.
Yeah, and I also just want to just jump in and say, I think it's natural, and to not beat yourself up over that natural inclination to want to do that, right? It's like the feeling of being in love feels beautiful. And so the hope or the diving back in, I don't want people to beat themselves up over it if they find themselves there. I just have seen too many times that it never ends up working. And I don't know how open you're willing to be on this interview, but I've seen you go from heartbreak to then, you got a tattoo on your arm that reminds you. In fact, do you mind sharing the tattoo?
Yeah, sure. It's I don't know how much you can see.
Read it out. Yeah, why don't you read it out?
Yeah, it says there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And it's a very famous William Shakespeare quote. And basically it's to remind myself that the way you think about something entirely determines how you feel about that thing. And that is one of the things I think is really powerful to build your confidence up, is to change your mindset and to have that mindset that, you can get over confidence, knowing that you have value, knowing that you can get over heartbreak. Or if you get a feeling, if you feel something comes over you that you feel sad, then knowing that you can choose to interpret that feeling however you want to. You don't have to make it a sad thing. You can turn it into a beautiful thing and think about it in a positive way that actually propels and encourages your confidence.
Yeah, and I love that so much. And so seeing how you've gone from heartbreak to then, having the tattoo to remind you about your emotions. And then also I've seen you go from, a guy that kind of worked out, happened to just be genetically bloody gifted in having muscles. God damn you, brother. But to then go like, oh, actually, I just started to cycle today and I feel really good and proud about the fact, or running. You've run, what have you done? You've done like 15 Ks and you've done like all these crazy stuff now. So like having something to focus on other than the heartbreak, having something that then builds your confidence in other areas has then shown over time that you've actually then built the confidence, but you've been active in it. And so I don't think that, going back to kind of the hope piece, I think a lot of it is natural. It is very, we all want to find true love, but the question is, do you just settle or do you actually push yourself to build the confidence so that you end up having a list of things that are non-negotiables of your values that now somebody else that comes into your life has to align with those values. So going to what you were saying about the dating apps and stuff, it's like when you see that person, like all your hopes and dreams go rushing in and put the pressure on that being that person, instead of saying, hang on, what are my values? What are the things that are important to me that I know I'm not going to negotiate? And when that person comes into my life, whether they have a great picture with a dog and they're like, oh my God, they love dogs. I love dogs too. That doesn't define their values. It just means that you guys have something in common. And so really separating what you have in common with your values is absolutely imperative, because another one I've heard a lot of people say actually is about habits. Oh my God, they love soccer. I love soccer. That isn't a value. Like people go just because they love the habit, it isn't a value system. And so I think that the value system, your core values, is where people get into relationships that they realize a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line actually are now mismatched.
Yeah, so true. I mean, look, we've all been guilty of it. Well, maybe you haven't because you've been married for so long, but a lot of us have been on the dating apps. It's like, yeah, but they're hot. It doesn't matter if they're into like hard rock or whatever it is, but look how hot they are, and you kind of get carried away with these kind of superficial things that don't really mean anything. And I really found out in the last year or two that those kind of things are really great in the early parts of relationships, because that kind of chemistry that you have with someone is like the evolutionary hook to get you to procreate, right? But it's not really useful, 1-2 years down the line. What is really important is, and I, learned this, is values, having a shared value system. And that's something that Tom actually said to me. He said, you just have a collision of values. And then once I really accepted that, it was much easier for me to then kind of move on into the next relationship.
That's amazing, because most people actually will go, well, maybe I don't value this as much, where they start to second guess what they actually value in order to just stay or maintain that relationship. And so doing this work when you're single, I think, is so important. And then maybe even writing yourself a letter about your values. If any time you start to feel weak, reread the letter you wrote to yourself. So, dear me, I wrote this list because when you were single, I really do, think this about it. Please do not do not let anybody destroy your values. You are worth much more, right? Like, I would actually do that for myself, because I just I know myself well enough that I know I would start to mold myself. Oh, but does this really matter? Is this really a big deal? And then you find yourself, to your point, a year, 2 years down the line, and your value system is now down the toilet, and you're just doing it in order to please that person. And that will never last. Like, it will never freaking work if you do that.
Yeah, so true. I want to talk about, because in your book you mentioned about defining your dreams and being like really specific about it. And you can do that with work, but you can also do it in your personal romantic life. And we just talked about values there, defining, writing a letter, defining what your values are. But how specific should people get, and what kind of things should they be writing down? And just to follow up to that, is there a danger that being too ultra specific can mean you have unrealistic expectations and end up, not finding anyone that can meet those?
Oh, that's a great question. So here's the thing that I think of is, what are the things? So that's why values, to me, it's not like I want someone that listens to hip hop music, right? Values are somebody that will never cheat on me because they value our relationship more than they value maybe a sexual inclination that they have. That's a value system. A value system where somebody would never lay a hand on me physically because the idea of them hurting me goes against their values, or just is something that they would never do because they would never treat a woman like that, right? Those, to me, are the strong values that I personally live by, that I then said to Tom when we first started dating, these are my non-negotiables. And I just articulated that to him. It is non-negotiable if you do these things. Now, another value could be, I really need somebody that is Christian or, Jewish or whatever, because this is how I want to bring up my children. And so this is a very important value that I have, somebody that believes in God. Okay, that's fantastic. Now, at the time that I met Tom, I really did believe in God, but it wasn't part of my value system. I didn't need my partner to do the same. And so, but somebody else may be like, no, I am a daughter or a son of the church, and so it is imperative. Cool. Like, don't stray away from that. And if you can't find somebody that has those value systems, don't now start to edge out and tell yourself maybe these are unrealistic expectations. I think that that's where we then will start to let go of our values. But everything else outside the value system, be flexible. Be flexible. That, like, I never thought that I would marry somebody who liked rock music. I love that you brought that up earlier, right? Like, I'm a hip hop chick. And the first time I get in his car and he's playing this music and it's like what I call the screaming music, I'm like, what the hell is this? And then I would play hip hop and he would like, these lyrics are terrible. Like, how can you even listen to the song? But that wasn't part of my value system. So if I had gone in, and that's the problem I think with dating apps, where you have to tick, I think, I've never been on a dating app, but like a lot of boxes. And so what if I had said in a dating app, I want someone that's into hip hop. I want somebody that likes dogs. I want somebody, right? And let's say they're a cat person and not a dog person. Does that mean all of a sudden that I'm not going to date them? that is where I think it becomes not even unrealistic expectations, but your expectations and your things don't actually dictate the relationship that you truly want. Because other things, if they respect you, right, that's part of my value system. I will always be with somebody that absolutely shows me respect. And so if they start to disrespect me or mock me for the things that I like, that's just that's just not a value system that I'm going to align with. And I know down the road that we won't work. But if you can, go, cool, you're a cat person, I'm a dog person, how do we commingle? Now both of you actually respect each other, and the respect is what I value, not the fact that you like a cat or a dog.
No, it's so true. It's I suppose, distinguishing between the higher overarching values that you have that are going to define whether you can be successful or not, and the smaller things that you can live with, like, Tom doesn't want to make the bed, but you do want to make the bed, those kind of things.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, because you mentioned religion. Obviously you got married in the church, and Tom had to be christened. I'm just curious actually how you would have felt if he'd have said, no, actually I don't want to get christened, and I don't want to get married in the church. Would that have been like a deal breaker for you at the time, or?
I think so, because I think it would have showed me that his values don't align with mine. And again, that's not a disrespect to him. There's no right or wrong. But to think through that, so for him, he didn't believe in God. And if he felt like getting christened was going against his values, then to me, that would have been a direct response to the fact that it goes against my values. So that's where you have the values where they're colliding. But thankfully, me and Tom's, our values actually were they worked beautifully as a dance. And so my value of, I really wanted to get married in a Greek church. I very much wanted to bring our children up Greek Orthodox. And the fact that he respected that, and it didn't go against his values, was exactly why we ended up working. But because that was important to me, and Tom and I, use that word important as a key word, and we maybe use that word 3 times a year. But getting married in a Greek church was important to me. Not getting christened was not important to him. And so that ended up, again, the beautiful dance. But if our values ever collided, again, I don't think that would have worked, because I don't think it is healthy for anybody to dismiss their values for the sake of a relationship.
Yeah, completely agree. What are some of the other things then that you think are really important for a long-lasting relationship? We've got values. That's probably the most important thing, I think we'd say.
To be honest, even above values, I would probably put growth mindset. And what I mean by that is, if one person has a growth mindset and the other person doesn't, now in the moments of trying to talk about values, in the moments of trying to talk about how we communicate, communicate about non-negotiables, if one person has a growth mindset, the other person doesn't, you're going to find yourself hitting a brick wall, because one person is going to dismiss you. The person without a growth mindset will be like, why do you keep harping on about this? Why does that even matter? Or just forget about it. It doesn't really make a difference. Oh, fine, I'm sorry, right? All of these things are ways that if you don't have a growth mindset, is going to stunt your relationship. But if you have a growth mindset and someone comes at you and is like, well, fine, I'm just going to say I'm sorry. Are you happy now? With a growth mindset, you can say, hey, look, do you think that language is going to help this relationship, yes or no? Do you think that attitude is actually going to help us grow together or grow apart? Now, imagine I come at somebody that doesn't have a growth mindset in that way. They'll look at me and they'll be like, oh, here she goes again, right? They're just going to dismiss me. So a growth mindset on both sides, I think, will allow you to do all the things that I just broke down. Discuss your non-negotiables, discuss your communication methods, discuss your love language, discuss the language you use, discuss your values. And so I think, honestly, that to me is the most imperative thing, I think, in a relationship that can help. It obviously isn't the only thing, but I think that if you don't have that, or one of you has it and the other one doesn't, I cannot see a relationship working, period.
Yeah, completely agree. Talk to me, you mentioned communication there. Talk to me about the ways which, a couple early in a relationship, but also a couple that have been together for a while, can learn to communicate better. Because I found that communication I think when I was younger, it's not something that I really ever thought about. And so you said, what do you mean communication? I just told you. But there are, the older you get, I think the more important that becomes, and the way you actually communicate with someone, actually actively listening and stuff, taking it on board what they're saying. So talk to me a little bit about how people can effectively communicate in a relationship.
Yeah, so communication is one of those, like if I say a word, it means something to me, but it may mean something completely different to you. So for instance, actually, I just got this negative comment on my YouTube channel a couple of days ago where someone was like, Lisa, I love your show, but I really hate that you call people homie. It offends me. Now, to me, the word homie is the most beautiful way that I can show you how much how meaningful you are to me. But it offends this other person. So just imagine, and that there is no right or wrong. Right? The only thing is how I perceive the word and how the other person perceives the word. And another example I'm going to give in real life with Tom. I remember when Tom met Dad for the first time. So he comes over to Dad's house. You guys are all there, and it's, we've got all my brothers, and Lily's there, my sister, and my dad's there, and my stepmom's there, and everyone's there. And he comes in, I'm so excited. I'm like, and nervous, of course, because I've never introduced the guy to Dad before. And so he comes in and everyone greets him, and I think we have an amazing time. We leave, we get in the car, and I'm expecting him to be like, oh my God, your family is amazing. And the first words out of his mouth was, oh my God, I can't believe how disrespectful your family was. And I was like, what? Disrespectful? What do you mean? And he goes, everyone was yelling at each other, everyone was talking over each other, your dad asks questions and then doesn't even listen to the answer. And I'm like, oh, that's just the Greeks. So now imagine
so true.
The perception of even just the behavior of somebody can be completely polar opposites depending on where you come from. So communication in a relationship of how you perceive things, how you actually perceive a word, how you perceive an interaction is going to be imperative. And so because Tom and I just came from completely different worlds, completely different, we had to really refine our communication. So number one was, what do you mean when you say this word? Because you literally assume the other person feels the same way they do when I say the word important. I think of important as being holy, like actually a holy ground. Now, if one of my teammates over here, Herson, turns around and is like, oh yeah, like don't worry, I know it's important to you, and then he doesn't actually do it, he doesn't perceive the word important as holy like I do. But I can't assume he does. He comes from a different world, a different background. So the same with Tom. So what we did is Tom and I literally sat down and said, okay, what are the words we're going to use to communicate that it carries weight? So we just went through a list. Okay, the word important. What do we mean by that? It means that no matter what you're doing, you have to actually drop what you're doing because this trumps everything else. If Tom's interviewing Obama, or if I'm interviewing Oprah and he says to me, hey, this is important, I'll be like, I'm so sorry, I've got to pause. My husband said it's important. That's how valuable that word is to us. And we've just pinky sworn that word means that. And so we've got this little kind of like dictionary, if you will, of our communication. And it's when you say this, it means this. This is how you have to act in accordance. Do we agree? Yes or no? And so now there's no curiosity. There's no wondering. There's no hoping the other person understands the word that you actually mean it to carry the weight. And then, and so when somebody even on the team says important, if I say important, I say, now listen. When I say the word important, I mean you have to drop everything. You have to walk out of a shoot. That's how I mean important. Do you understand? Yes, I understand, Lisa. Great. And then we move on. But I don't assume. And so I think that's where so many couples get, like flowers, for instance. I told Tom when we first met that I didn't really want flowers because I used to think of it as a way to, quote unquote, manipulate the partner if they tried to say sorry, it's like, well, here's flowers, now I'm really sorry. But it actually didn't fix it. So I always saw that as a way to just coat a probably even underlying thing, or even on a beautiful occasion. It's like, I don't want you to buy me flowers because the world tells you on Valentine's Day, you should buy me flowers. I want you actually to just buy me flowers when you feel like you want to buy me flowers. Now, 10 years later, I changed my mind. But I had to articulate that to him. And I had to then say to him, sit him down and not just throw a comment out and be like, oh, I like flowers now, and expect him to pivot. No, he's had like 10 years of this idea of what flowers mean to me. So I had to communicate in a very different way and sit him down and say, now, babe, I know for 10 years I said I didn't. I've actually changed my mind. And now, because we've been together for a while, I actually don't think a flower's been a manipulation tactic. I actually do love them. It makes me feel like you're thinking of me. And because my love language is acts of service from Tom, I see it as an act of service. And so I just had to communicate that with him instead of throw out one comment and then expect him to completely change the idea he's had about flowers. So communication is key to every little freaking nuance that you want, especially as you start being in a relationship for longer and longer and longer. Because you change, and so your wording's going to change, the way you feel about things are going to change, and so you have to communicate that.
That's so interesting. I kind of, I suppose, thought of communication a lot to do with, how you interact and how you sit down with that person, and, you take time and you actually actively listen, you eye contact, all that kind of stuff. But I suppose I never thought about the fact that you both might have different lexicons. And so you mentioned love languages there. Maybe we need to have like what's your communication language? And understand that you use different words for different things, and that they have to get really specific and at least make the other person know that when I say this, I mean this, because otherwise you're kind of talking past each other, aren't you?
Yeah, and that sitting down and eye contact and stuff is beautiful and imperative. But when you sit down with each other and do that, are you talking past each other? Because because one of the biggest things in a relationship that is imperative is to feel seen and heard. Now imagine you're seeing them and you're trying to hear them, but you don't actually understand them. Now you feel like you're having the same argument over and over. So let's take the bed, for example. The bed, you mentioned earlier about me and Tom, like I want to have the bed made and he doesn't. It just felt like a stupid little argument that we were just battling over and over and over again. And I was like, he just doesn't understand that I really want the freaking bed made. And he's like, she just doesn't understand that I really don't want to spend the time making the bed. And we just kept talking past each other until we sat down and I said, what does making the bed mean to you that you were so adamant against it? And he said, making the bed is a time waster. And I value time over cleanliness. And that's when it was like the heavens opened up and it was like, oh, now I actually get it. I actually understand through the way that we're communicating. I haven't just seen and heard him. I've now understood what he's meant. And I've said to him, well, let me tell you why I need the bed made. Because for me, I've realized over time that if I get anxious, the thing that propels my anxiety is a messy room. And if I have things made neatly and tidy, I actually now can have clarity in the way that I think. So now you can see our values are actually opposing in making the bed. So what we had to, but we didn't get it. We were just bickering ridiculously over the freaking bed. Now what ends up happening is if you don't actually get to the understanding point, that bickering first of all may be cute, it may be silly. After like 10 years, you now have contempt and resentment towards that person because they're so disrespectful that they don't actually make the bed. No, it isn't about disrespect. I would have built contempt over something that actually isn't accurate. Why? Because I didn't understand, even though we were talking about it.
So if the couple's been in a relationship for 10 years then and they haven't been communicating well, how do they even begin to start that process of making sure they're on the same page about the words that they use and that kind of thing?
I think it becomes like, I'm always in real life practicing. So take a last communication that you had with them and then start writing down what you think they said. what you actually think that means to them. And then the partner does the same. And I know me and you have, and Tom have very much spoken about still manning, right? And still manning someone's argument means you don't repeat them, but you actually imagine yourself as that person, right? So I will imagine I'm Tom, and I will tell you my standpoint as if I'm Tom. So I will say, I don't like making the bed because I feel like time is so valuable. It's the one thing I will never get back. And because my time is so valuable in the things that I can achieve towards my goals, making the bed is against my value system. And then I'll say, am I right? Like I'll say to Tom, right? Did I get your position right? And he will say yes or no. Now, if it's no, I'll say, okay, I still don't understand you. And that's where you just keep repeating. And he'll repeat his stance. And I'll say, all right, let me see if I understand. I don't want to make the bed, right? And it's like this rinse and repeat. Now, going back to the growth mindset thing, imagine you don't have a growth mindset. They're not going to be willing to do this. They're going to think it's ridiculous, or they're like, you just get my point. Fine. Yes, that's fine. It's like, no, let me repeat. And so the arguments and the discussions Tom have had, we won't move on until we've actually figured it out. We don't sweep anything under the rug, but everything comes back to going back to that last discussion you had. What's the thing that you guys are rubbing each other the wrong way? Where's the friction? Sit down with that person, still man their argument, keep refining it, and then say, that's what you mean by I value time. I didn't realize that when you say I value time, it means this. So don't assume, that's the next thing. Don't assume that the language you're using actually means the same thing to them. So that's why Tom and I said, let's just do a dictionary. So I think that also should be part of that discussion. It's like, okay, let's do a dictionary that when we say this word, we're very much aligned. When we say this, we're aligned. When we say this, this is what it means. And then this is how I want you to act when I say this word. This is how I want you to respond when I say this word. Do you agree? And it goes both ways.
Love that. It sounds like also when you're talking about steel manning someone's argument, that you do need to have a lot of empathy as well, because you need to not only be able to describe what they're saying to you intellectually, but you also kind of need to then put yourself in their situation to say, okay, they say that they don't want this because of this, but you have to then be able to feel how they feel in some ways, because if you don't feel any kind of empathy for them, then you're just like, well, okay, but that's not an important value to me. So why I don't understand why it's an important value to you. Do you kind of agree with that?
I don't know if I would have used the word empathy, because there are many times that I've still man Tom's argument with gritted teeth. Because I'm just like, I don't like what I'm saying right now. But I think it needs to be, you have to value the other person's thoughts and how they really feel. So even if I don't, maybe we're saying the same thing actually, and so this will go to, what does empathy mean to you? When you use the word versus what empathy means to me when I use the word. So, but you do want to win as a couple, and so if you want to win as a couple, then you're willing to do the things and still man that person's argument, even if you don't agree with it, to get to the result that you both want. So I very much, I love this analogy. I liken a relationship to a tennis match. A lot of couples are playing singles. So you hit the ball, they're on one side of the net, the other person ping pongs the ball back, and then now so you're playing the same sport, but actually the truth is only one of you can actually win. But if you're playing a game of doubles, you either win together or you lose together. And where you're weak, you hope the other person's strong, right? If you've got a weak backhand, maybe you're not great at tennis, but maybe hopefully the other person's great at backhand. But either way, you want to help the other person improve so that you can win together. So if you go into these types of discussions where you're still manning someone's argument, and this is like a masterclass right here, you have to want to be playing doubles, because when you're doing it, it doesn't feel good. So I don't even want to pretend when you still man, it's like, oh, I really love Tom, and so I'm going to do it with all the joy in my heart. No, I do it sometimes with freaking gritted teeth, but I do it because I know it is needed for me to understand him And I have to understand him in order for us to move forward, because I want us to because I am playing a game of doubles. We either win together or we lose together. And so if I don't understand him, that means we lose together. And losing, even though you're together, it's not going to help propel you forward.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. We've talked a lot about values, and I think kind of the other side of that coin is almost boundaries. You talked about in your book about how you had to deal with mum when you were going through your health issues, and how that was a really difficult thing for you to put those boundaries in place so that your relationship could survive basically these constant kind of questions all the time. So what kind of boundaries do you think are important to put in place in a relationship, and what's the best way to go about putting those boundaries in place?
Yeah, I love this, because boundaries and values really do go, I think, hand in hand. So going back to earlier where I said 2 of my non-negotiable boundaries were, you can never lay a hand on me physically in a harmful way, and you can never cheat on me. Like, those were my 2 boundaries I wasn't willing to cross at all. Those were not just a line in the sand. They were like on freaking concrete. You can't remove them. Like, they just, I won't pass them. But I articulated that to Tom. So I think boundaries, you have to articulate them to your partner. Every time it's a non-negotiable, you must say that. And what I would say to Tom is, look, it is a boundary for me. And just to be clear, I'm not the type of person that's going to forgive you. And while a lot of people do, and I have zero judgment on any type of person or any person that wants to forgive somebody that has forgiven someone for those 2, I just know I would never be able to forgive him. And so I set him up for success. Like, again, I'm playing a game of doubles, so I want him to win as well. And so that means I had to say to him, I am not the type of woman that will forgive you. And so if I find out you've ever cheated on me, I'm not even going to give you space to explain. I won't even hear you out. I hear that you've cheated on me. The very next 30 seconds is me packing my bags and I'm out of the door. So I want to just let you know now, to set you up for success. It isn't a boundary like, you fucking crossed my line, right? Like, it's to set you up for success. And then same with the, putting a hand on me in a harmful way. It's like, I will never be able to forgive you if you ever do this. I am out the door. Do you understand? Yes or no? And then there's going to be negotiable boundaries where you change your boundaries over time. So one of the examples I give in the book is, if you're triggered maybe about your weight and your partner is health conscious, and that really does trigger you. If they're just like, oh, you're going to have a dessert, you can maybe set a boundary with your partner to say, please do not ever comment on the food that I eat, because right now I have a very unhealthy relationship with food and I'm trying to build my self-esteem back up. And so every time you make a comment, I cannot have you do that. Okay, that's a boundary you've articulated to your partner, you've given a reason why, you've made it very clear. But what if you've now overcome that hurdle, and maybe now you're much more comfortable with food, and now you just really want to get healthy and you really find passion in working out and eating healthy. And so now your partner, who you've told to never comment, maybe now you want to start asking them questions. Well, now your boundary is changing. And so now you want to articulate again that your boundary has changed, and you explain why. But your boundary is changing. So if you think about a relationship for the long term, you have the non-negotiable boundaries, and then you have the ones that may be temporary. You don't necessarily want to say temporary, but they may be temporary as you change and evolve. And then the last thing I'll say on boundaries is, I've interviewed this woman called Terry Cole. She is the most amazing. I love her so much. She's so freaking amazing. And she wrote a book called Boundary Boss. And what I love is she broke down boundaries, and she talks about boundaries about being on my side of the street and your side of the street. So a lot of the time we want to set boundaries like, don't do this. But the truth is, if you can't just tell somebody what to do and what not to do. So my boundary with Tom is, you can go and cheat, but my boundary is, I won't forgive you. So another example that she gives that I actually love is, let's say you have, you're the person that goes to bed at 10 p.m. every night because you wake up early, that's just your routine, you very much value your routine, and you're with somebody that actually likes to party a couple of days a week. And you can't, as a couple, you can't tell somebody you can't go and party. That's their life, that's their habits, that's what they're doing. But if they keep coming in and they wake you up, okay, you can say, I don't like being woken up. My boundary is that I go to bed at 10 p.m. and I want a lifestyle where I don't get woken up in the middle of the night because I wake up really tired. Your boundary is if you come in at 2 a.m., please do not switch on the light because you wake me up. That's you making sure that you stay in your lane and in your side of the street. And so that analogy hit me so beautifully because I used to absolutely think that I could tell Tom what to do and that was my boundary. And it's like, no, he can go do whatever he likes, but my boundary is this. And you have to articulate it to them. I think you have to say why the boundary is important to you. Let them know if it's a negotiable or non-negotiable. If it's just like right now, like I'll say to Tom, like right now I'm struggling with this, so please don't say this to me because I don't, like I said with the food situation. And so I think boundaries are beautiful. I think people think of boundaries as being you're putting your walls up, but I actually think it's the opposite. When you start to tell someone what your boundaries are, now you can be freer. You can actually bring them in more because you've articulated the things that are important to you. And so, I think people just need to see boundaries as a way to bond with your partner. I think you need to be clear about them and then not be so dogmatic in every boundary that you have, and that sometimes it serves you to adjust your boundary over time.
Yeah, I love that. I like you mentioned about walls there. I heard an expression that boundaries are not walls. Healthy boundaries are not walls. They're fences and gates that allow you to enjoy the beauty of your garden, and you can kind of choose who walks through those gates, because maybe some people you let through and some people you don't. And so I think those boundaries can be flexible, they can be person dependent, but I love that.
And I love that you actually said person dependent, by the way. That was like a mic drop right there. Like, it really is. Like, your boundaries that you have with your parents is going to be different than the boundaries you have with your friends. It's going to be different that you have with your partner. But even actually, to be honest, your boundaries around your friends are going to be different. Like, I have boundaries where I'm like, there's somebody that's way closer to me. And so a boundary there may be different than somebody that I see once every 6 months. And so almost knowing what your boundaries are, like having clarity for yourself. And I think that this is where women specifically feel like, they get pushed around a lot, that people step over them, that people disrespect them. And I used to feel like that until I started to identify, well, hang on a minute, what are my boundaries? When somebody says this, is that a boundary, yes or no? Okay, cool. How are you going to respond if someone crosses your boundary? And so on and so forth. But I love that you said that.
Yeah. And obviously you mentioned, you can decide what you do, right? Someone crosses your boundaries and you can decide to leave. But I'm curious as well, like people that feel like maybe someone hasn't crossed their boundaries, maybe they just feel like they're stuck in this relationship and they don't know whether they should leave or stay. What are some of the ways to determine whether someone should stay in a relationship or leave?
Oh, I mean, there's going to be many different variations and everything's going to be relationship specific. But the thing that I still even do in my relationship now, and Tom and I have been together for 23 years and been married for 21, is to just ask myself, am I still happy? I think a lot of us go with the flow and just like, well, I've been with them for this long, it's fine. And the truth is, I don't just want a fine relationship. And I think that became a demand that I made of myself. I want a beautiful, gorgeous, ever-evolving relationship that makes me feel alive. Now, you have to feel alive independently as well, but it is imperative that you guys are fanning each other's flames instead of trying to smother that flame. And so the question is, does that person make you feel better when you're with them, or worse? I think that's an identifying factor. I think you have to ask yourself, when you think about your relationship, do you say it's just fine? And I'm not saying you should leave. I just think these are identifying factors on whether it's something that lights you up or not. And then you go through the process of, are they capable? Or have you guys changed so much that now they're no longer capable to bring what you want to the table? Well, have you articulated that to them? I think that's one of my biggest concerns these days, where people now, I think the rate of marriage is lessening. And it's not to pass my own beliefs onto other people, but I just think sometimes if you're not in a committed relationship with a marriage, I worry it's easier to leave. And here's the thing, maybe it's better. Like if someone's physically abusive and it's easier to leave, fuck yeah. But if it's just like, well, we're not getting along anymore, and oh my God, it'd be too much work to like actually, talk through, I'm just gonna bounce. I just think that maybe you haven't given that person may be fantastic for you, but you haven't articulated the problem. You haven't been necessarily willing to work through it. And I guess a marriage just makes it harder to leave, which then maybe, hopefully, makes you want to work harder for that relationship. Now, of course, like I said, the opposite can happen, where if you're in a relationship that's abusive and, or they've cheated, but you've got a marriage, it makes it harder to leave, even if you do want to. So again, I want to make sure that people hear me, that I'm not just blanket statement things. But I think it just comes to, and again, this is my belief, somebody else may value stability. So I actually want to have a more stable relationship where I know what I'm getting with that person. They're a great father, they're a great, whatever, fill in the blank. And so I actually don't need the beautiful growth and evolution and fire, and don't need them to fan my flame. And cool, then at least you've identified why you're in that relationship, you've identified why you're not leaving, you've identified that it's a choice, and now you can actually enjoy that relationship for what it is. But for me, what I'm looking for is for somebody to absolutely uplift me. Now, again, I don't rely on that. I think I need to be able to uplift myself, but I do want somebody that makes me feel better when I'm with them than when I'm not with them. I do want to be somebody to build a life with. That is important to me. And so I always assess my relationship with Tom. Tom always assesses his relationship with me, and we're always working on it. We're always refining it. I think date night is super important. I think sex is super important. Now, imagine you're in a relationship where sex isn't a value that you have in a relationship, but to one person it is. Well, what's going to happen over time is one of you isn't going to think of it as a big deal. The other person is, and now you're going to be growing apart versus growing together. So Tom and I spoke about that as well, the value of sex, the importance of sex in our relationship. Do we both agree with that? And so, yeah, I think it's not going with a perpetual motion of where your relationship has already been, and to really keep reassessing. And the last thing I'll say on this matter is, your skill sets are going to be different, hopefully, right? Or not even hopefully, but you're never going to be exactly the same. So I'm able to identify when Tom and I are drifting apart sooner than he is. So what we've done is we've communicated. I don't take that personally. Tom, he just gets driven by work so much that sometimes he just gets tunnel focused. I don't take that personally. I just know that that's who he is. So I know he gets very tunnel focused. So if we start drifting apart, he may not realize it or identify it, but I will. And so we've sat down and said, we know this isn't healthy for our relationship to drift apart. Do we agree? Yes. Okay. If we agree, how do we make sure we don't drift apart? Well, I'm better at it than he is. So we've just knighted me, the person that is able to speak up when we start drifting apart. Now, in this communication loop that we've got, though, is if I start to wave the flag, even if he doesn't realize it, he has to acquiesce to me. Because he knows himself, and he may go, no, what do you mean we're not drifting apart? And then 2 weeks later, he's like, babe, how come we haven't seen each other? And I'm like, I was waving the flag for 2 freaking weeks. So instead of arguing about it, we've just put into place that I'm the person that's allowed to do it. When I do it, even if he doesn't feel it, he acquiesces and adapts. So for instance, last week, I literally put in our calendar, date day. And I was like, this means that no matter what work you have, I don't care what important deadlines you have, we have a date coming up and you have to make yourself available. And so he just saw it in his calendar. He didn't feel the drift yet, but he's like, absolutely, I'll make sure that I have nothing to do. And so even that of how you're going to refine your relationship and I don't take it personally, and I think that's important, is I just know Tom's character and I don't take it personally if he doesn't realize it. I know that he loves me because he's proven that over the last 23 years. I know that he cares for me, and I know that our relationship is priority number one if it ever comes in conflict with his business. Now, why do I know that? Because he has proven it time and time again. And so it's not just he says it, he actually acts in accordance to that.
I love that. You guys are so good at communicating. You're kind of like my gold standard that I go to when I aspire for communication in a relationship. Well,
Thank
listen,
you.
I could literally talk to you all night about this stuff, but I know that time is of the essence. So just before I ask you a quick last question, do you want to just tell people where they can find you?
Yes, and just a tip for YouTube, you never want to tell people that it's your last question because now people are going to bounce. So guys, do not bounce because you're going to want to listen to this last question.
Stay.
So people can find me at Lisa Bilyeu, Bilyeu on all fronts. On YouTube is where I love to do all these interviews and really go deep on relationships and everything mindset. And then on all platforms on Instagram and TikTok and all those other places.
Amazing. Go and check it out, guys. Okay, so if you had to give one tip to people that are just going on a new journey in a new relationship, what would it be?
Ooh. Knowing who you are and what you want and writing your values down is, before you ever start dating, before you start the journey, like, you've got to start there. If you skip that step, it's going to be an uphill freaking battle, or you're going to end up not even just an uphill battle. You may end up with somebody that isn't right for you, and you're going to, have all the oxytocin and the endorphins running when you first meet them, and then a year down the line, you'll be like, oh, they're not right for me. And then you end up in this loop of never really being able to find the one or the right person for you because you haven't done that fundamental base work that you have to do before you get into a relationship.
Value your values, guys. That is the takeaway message.
I like that.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more relationship content.
Guys, one more thing. I'm so freaking proud of you, brother of mine. I love you more than life itself. You mean
I love you too.
more than the world to me. I even said, guys, if you want a bit of an insight, I even said, I never do interviews this early, but for my brother, I will always show up. And so how do you... Aww. So you guys watching right now, go and support the people in your life. Show up for them. Be the person that you want to be, and make no excuses. And so I'm so freaking proud of you that you're doing this, and this was so fun.
Love that.